Who hurt my Omega? The Alpha King's voice stopped the entire royal hall, and for one breath, even the winter wind seemed to disappear. Emily Carter had barely reached the center of the marble floor when her knees weakened beneath her. Adrian Blackwood caught her before she could fall, steadying her carefully as the crystal chandeliers cast pale light across her exhausted face. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped. "Please, do not ask." Adrian looked down at her, and something in his expression changed. He was the Alpha King, accustomed to decisions, council disputes, and people waiting for his command. Yet none of that mattered now. Emily was trembling, and she was trying desperately to hide it. "Look at me," he said quietly. Her blue eyes lifted toward his. They held fear, but not fear of him. That was what unsettled Adrian most. Emily had spent 3 days moving through his palace almost unnoticed, carrying records, helping workers, and quietly correcting mistakes that others ignored. She had never asked for his attention. She had never expected his protection. Now she was standing in the center of his kingdom as though she had finally reached the end of a road she had been forced to walk alone. Adrian helped her into a nearby chair and turned toward the silent council members surrounding the hall. "Everyone leaves." His voice was controlled, but absolute. One by one, the officials stepped away. Emily watched them disappear through the tall wooden doors. When the hall was finally empty, Adrian returned to her. "Now tell me what happened." Emily lowered her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her sleeve. "If I tell you, someone will know I spoke. Someone already knows you are afraid." She looked up sharply. Adrian softened his voice. "I am not asking because I am angry. I am asking because you came here when you had nowhere else to go." Emily swallowed. "I did not come for protection." "Then why did you come?" For several seconds, she said nothing. The palace clock marked the passing of another minute. Outside, snow drifted across the gardens, quiet and untouched. Finally, Emily whispered, "Because I found something." Adrian waited. "Something in the royal records." His expression became focused. "What did you find?" Emily looked toward the closed council doors. "I cannot tell you yet." Adrian studied her carefully. "Why not?" Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Because I think the person responsible has access to your administration." Silence settled between them. Adrian understood the weight of those words. Emily was not simply afraid of a mistake. She was afraid of someone close to the throne. He pulled a chair closer but kept a respectful distance. "Then we will find the truth carefully." Emily looked at him. "You believe me?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "I believe that you would not come to me like this without a reason." Something inside Emily finally loosened. For days, she had carried the secret alone. Now, for the first time, someone powerful was willing to listen before judging her. Adrian looked toward the empty hall and then back at her. "You do not have to tell me everything tonight." Emily nodded slowly. "Thank you." But Adrian knew one thing already. Whatever Emily had discovered had frightened her enough to cross every boundary between servant and king. And somewhere inside his palace, someone was waiting to learn whether the quiet Omega would speak. Neither of them knew that the records Emily had found would soon place her reputation, her future, and Adrian's trust in the same balance. 3 days earlier, Emily Carter had been almost invisible inside Blackwood Palace. At 26, she had learned how to move through its marble corridors without drawing attention, carrying ledgers, organizing household records, and helping wherever another person needed an extra hand. She was a white female Omega with a quiet nature, clear blue eyes, and a habit of noticing details other people overlooked. The palace was magnificent, but Emily rarely looked at its beauty for long. There was always another task waiting. That morning, she was carrying a stack of household records toward the Eastern Council chamber when she heard a young palace worker being questioned inside. His name was Daniel, and Emily knew him well enough to recognize the nervousness in his voice. An accounting error had appeared in a supply report, and Daniel was about to be blamed for it. Emily stopped outside the half-open door. She should have continued walking. Instead, she remembered how often Daniel stayed late to finish his work, even when no one thanked him. She looked down at the records in her hands and noticed something that did not match the report being discussed. The shipment date was wrong. Emily took a slow breath and entered. Several officials turned toward her. "Can we help you?" one asked. Emily held the documents against her chest. "I believe there is a mistake in the report." The official looked surprised. "This is a council matter." Emily nodded respectfully. "I understand, but the shipment arrived on Tuesday. I recorded it myself." Daniel looked at her with quiet relief. The official reached for the document. Before he could speak, the doors opened. Adrian Blackwood entered the chamber with two senior advisors. The Alpha King wore a formal black suit, his expression calm and serious. Everyone immediately stood. Adrian looked around the room. "What is happening?" One official answered quickly. "A minor disagreement over a supply report, Your Majesty." Adrian's eyes moved toward Emily. "Is that accurate?" Emily hesitated, then stepped forward and handed him the record. "No, Your Majesty. Someone is about to be blamed for an error they did not make." Adrian studied the page. He asked her where the original information came from, and Emily explained exactly when the shipment arrived, who received it, and where the entry had been recorded. Her answers were precise. Adrian compared the report with the supporting document. The difference was obvious. He looked toward the council. "Correct the record." The official lowered his head. "Yes, Your Majesty." Adrian then looked at Daniel. "You will not be held responsible for an error you did not make." Daniel thanked him quietly. Emily turned toward the door, hoping to disappear before anyone noticed her again. "Emily." She stopped. Adrian looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you for speaking." She lowered her eyes. It was the right thing to do. Most people would have kept walking. Emily gave a small, almost uncertain smile. "I am not most people." Adrian watched her leave. He did not know why those words stayed with him. Later that afternoon, Emily returned to the Eastern Archives and continued her ordinary work. She sorted records, checked dates, and helped another employee locate an old document. Then she opened a drawer that she had personally locked the previous evening. It was slightly open. Emily froze. Inside, several financial records had been moved. One important file was missing. She carefully checked the surrounding documents and noticed that someone had searched through the archive without disturbing anything else. Her heart began to race. Then she found a folded note hidden beneath an old ledger. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was clear: check the royal household account before the Winter Council. Emily read it twice. She looked toward the archive door. For the first time, the quiet palace no longer felt safe. And somewhere beyond those walls, someone had already realized that Emily Carter was paying attention. Emily did not sleep well that night. The folded note remained inside her notebook, and every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the drawer standing open when she knew she had locked it. By morning, the palace had returned to its usual rhythm. Servants moved through the corridors, council members carried documents between offices, and sunlight reflected from the marble floors. Yet Emily felt different. She had discovered something that was not meant to be found. She waited until the Eastern Archives were nearly empty before returning to the records. The missing financial file still bothered her. She checked the remaining ledgers one by one, comparing dates and authorization numbers. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Emily turned and found Marcus Vale standing near the doorway. Marcus was one of the senior officials in the royal administration, a polished man in his early 40s who always seemed comfortable around power. "Good morning, Emily," he said. "You are working early again. There is a lot to organize." His eyes moved toward the open ledger on the desk. "Still looking through financial records?" Emily closed the book gently. "I am checking the archive." Marcus smiled. "Of course. Just remember that some records are better left to senior administrators." His voice remained polite, but the message was clear. Emily kept her expression calm. "I only organize what I am assigned." Marcus took a few steps into the room. "The Alpha King seemed impressed by your observations yesterday." Emily said nothing. That kind of attention can be complicated for someone in your position. Emily looked directly at him. "I am not seeking anyone's attention." Marcus gave a small nod. "Good. Then you understand why discretion matters." He turned and left. Emily waited until his footsteps disappeared before opening the ledger again. Her hands were steady now. Marcus had not accused her of anything, but he had asked exactly the wrong questions. She placed the ledger aside and searched the archive index for the royal household account mentioned in the note. The record was older than most of the documents around it. After several minutes, she found the reference and pulled the corresponding volume from a locked cabinet. Inside were hundreds of pages covering 18 months of household transactions. Emily began comparing the entries with the community funding reports. At first, nothing stood out. Then she noticed a transfer made shortly before one of the king's official trips. The amount was small enough to disappear among ordinary expenses, but the authorization number looked familiar. She searched the previous pages and found the same number attached to another transaction. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She copied both dates into her notebook and continued searching. More transfers appeared. Different amounts. Different accounts. The same authorization number. Someone had reused legitimate approval codes to make later transactions appear ordinary. Emily closed the ledger and immediately went to the private library. Adrian was there, standing beside the tall windows with several reports on his desk. He looked up when she entered. "You found something." It was not a question. Emily handed him her notebook. "The same authorization. Number appears on several different transfers." Adrian read the entries carefully. "Could this be a clerical error?" "Not this many times." She showed him the dates. "They happened shortly before your official trips, when the administration was busiest." Adrian's expression became more serious. "Who knew my schedule?" Emily thought for a moment. "Senior council officials. The administration office. Anyone with access to royal planning." Adrian looked toward the documents. "Marcus Vale." Emily nodded. "He came to the archives this morning." Adrian's gaze returned to her. "What did he say?" Emily repeated his warning word for word. Adrian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he closed the notebook. "He knows you are looking." Emily lowered her eyes. "Should I stop?" Adrian answered immediately. "No." She looked up. "Then what should I do?" He stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance. "You should not investigate this alone." Emily almost smiled. "I can take care of myself." "I know." His expression softened. "That is not why I am saying it." For a moment, neither spoke. Adrian looked at the records again. "Someone has been using my administration to move money without proper authorization. If the trail leads where I think it does, this is much larger than a missing file." Emily nodded. "Then we need the original records." Adrian opened a locked cabinet near his desk. "We will find them." Neither of them noticed the figure standing briefly beyond the library corridor, watching the closed doors before quietly walking away. The investigation had begun, and now someone else knew that the King and the Omega were searching for the same truth. The private library remained quiet after Adrian opened the cabinet. Emily stood beside the desk while he removed an older set of household ledgers, each one protected by a simple leather cover. The discovery from the previous evening had changed the way they looked at the palace. Every record now seemed capable of hiding another answer. Adrian placed the first ledger on the table and opened it carefully. Emily leaned closer. "These are the original household accounts?" she asked. "Some of them," Adrian replied. "They were preserved before the current reporting system was introduced." Emily began comparing the older entries with the newer reports. Within minutes, she found another inconsistency. "Here." Adrian looked over her shoulder. "What do you see?" "The amount is different." She placed two records beside each other. The original transfer was smaller, but the later report shows a larger amount. Adrian studied the figures. Could someone have corrected the amount afterward? Emily shook her head. If it were a correction, the original authorization would show an amended entry. She pointed to the bottom of the page. "It does not." Adrian remained silent. Emily continued through the ledger. The same pattern appeared several times. Community funds were moved into different accounts, then recorded later as ordinary household expenses. None of the individual transfers seemed large enough to attract attention, but together they formed a clear pattern. "Someone knew exactly how to hide them," Emily said. Adrian looked at the dates. "And they knew when the palace would be busiest." Emily nodded. "Most of these happened before your official travel." Adrian walked toward the window. "My travel schedule is restricted." Then the person doing this had access to private administrative information. Adrian turned back toward her. "That narrows the list considerably." Emily hesitated. "Marcus Vale." Adrian did not answer immediately. He returned to the table and examined the documents again. "Suspicion is not proof." Emily nodded. "I know. We need evidence that cannot be dismissed." He closed the ledger. "And we need to know where the money went." Before they could continue, a quiet knock came at the library door. A palace messenger entered and handed Adrian a sealed document. Adrian opened it, read the first page, and his expression became noticeably colder. Emily watched him carefully. "What is it?" He handed the document to her. It was an administrative order suspending Emily from palace service while an investigation into the missing funds was conducted. At the bottom was Marcus Vale's signature. Emily stared at it. He moved quickly. Adrian took the paper back. 2. Quickly. "What happens now?" Emily asked. "You remain here." She looked surprised. "But the order says I am suspended." "The order does not have final authority." Adrian's voice remained calm. "Marcus is trying to remove you before we can finish the investigation." Emily lowered her eyes. "Maybe that is what he should do. If I leave, the problem may disappear." Adrian looked at her. "You are not the problem." She looked up. "Then why does it feel like I am becoming one?" Adrian's expression softened. "Because someone wants you to believe that." Emily was silent. The words reached deeper than she expected. She had spent most of her life believing that staying quiet was safer, that helping others from the background was enough, and that powerful people did not need to know her name. Now the Alpha King was telling her that her voice mattered. Adrian turned toward the desk and opened another file. "We will have independent auditors review every account." Emily looked at him. "People outside the palace?" "Yes. People with no reason to protect Marcus, me, or anyone else." Emily nodded slowly. "Then they might believe the records. They will follow the evidence." Adrian looked directly at her. "That is what we need." The next several hours passed quietly. The auditors compared original ledgers with current reports and marked every discrepancy. Emily explained how the archive system worked, while Adrian answered questions about the royal administration. Eventually, one auditor placed two documents side by side. "These authorization numbers are identical," he said. Emily leaned forward. She recognized the number immediately. "That one was issued 18 months ago." The auditor nodded. "Yet it appears on a newer transfer." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Then we have proof that someone reused an old authorization." Emily looked at the records. "But we still do not know who made the change." The auditor pointed to the signature section. "Perhaps this will help." Emily looked down. The signature belonged to Jonathan Reed, Adrian's chief advisor. The room went silent. Adrian stared at the document, clearly struggling with what it meant. Jonathan had served him faithfully for 12 years. Emily watched Adrian carefully. "Do you believe he did it?" Adrian finally answered, "I do not know." His honesty surprised her. He could have accused Jonathan immediately, but he refused to condemn someone without evidence. Emily understood then that the king was not simply protecting her. He was protecting the truth itself. The discovery of Jonathan Reed's signature changed the atmosphere in the library, but Adrian refused to let suspicion become judgment. He ordered the auditors to preserve every original record and compare each transaction with the corresponding council report. Emily remained at the table, carefully sorting the documents while Adrian reviewed the royal schedules. The work continued into the evening, and the palace outside slowly grew quiet. Emily noticed that every suspicious transfer appeared shortly before a major royal event, when the administration handled dozens of additional reports. "Look at these dates," she said. Adrian came beside her. "They match the busiest days on your schedule." He studied the records. Someone knew exactly when the palace would have less time to examine routine accounts. Emily nodded. "That means whoever changed them had access to more than financial records." Adrian's expression hardened with concern. "They had access to confidential planning information." One of the auditors placed another document on the table. "There is something else." Emily leaned closer. The document was a request for temporary funding adjustments, submitted 18 months earlier. Jonathan Reed had signed the authorization, but another name appeared beneath it. Marcus Vale. Emily looked at Adrian. Marcus provided the request. Adrian read the page twice. "Then we need to know what Jonathan was told when he approved it." A quiet knock interrupted them. Jonathan himself entered the library. He looked tired, as though he already knew why Adrian had summoned him. His eyes moved from Adrian to Emily and then to the documents on the table. "Your Majesty." Adrian gestured toward the chair. "Sit down, Jonathan." Jonathan did so. Adrian placed the oldest authorization in front of him. "Do you remember this?" Jonathan studied the page. "Yes." Emily watched his expression closely. "What was this transfer for?" Jonathan took a slow breath. "I was told it was part of a temporary restructuring of community funds." Adrian remained silent. "Who told you that?" Jonathan looked toward Marcus's name. Marcus Vale provided the report. Emily asked quietly, "Did you verify the information yourself?" Jonathan lowered his eyes. "No. I believed the report had already been reviewed." Adrian's expression showed disappointment, but his voice remained controlled. "And what happened afterward?" Jonathan explained that he had been told the funds would be restored during the next allocation cycle. Instead, the later reports showed different amounts, and he had assumed the accounting office had completed the necessary adjustments. Emily studied the records. But the original community accounts were never restored. Jonathan looked at her. "I did not know that." One auditor compared the old report with a later copy. "Someone changed these figures after the authorization was issued." Adrian turned toward Jonathan. "Did you ever authorize another transfer using this number?" Jonathan shook his head. "Not knowingly." Emily suddenly noticed something in the later reports. The authorization number was copied. Everyone looked at her. The original number appears here, but the signature was added to a newer document. The auditor examined it and nodded. That is correct. Adrian finally understood the larger pattern. Jonathan had made one legitimate decision based on information he believed was accurate. Someone had later reused his authorization to make additional transactions appear legitimate. Emily looked toward the window. Marcus knew Jonathan would be trusted. Adrian nodded. And he knew people would blame the records before they questioned the system. The room became quiet. Then a palace messenger arrived with another sealed notice. Adrian opened it and read the first page. His expression changed. He handed it to Emily. It was a formal announcement that the council would meet the following morning to review the financial investigation and determine whether Emily should remain suspended. Marcus had called for the hearing. Emily stared at the notice. He wants the council to decide before we finish. Adrian folded the document. Then tomorrow, we will finish first. Emily looked at him. What if they do not believe me? Adrian met her eyes. Then they will have to ignore the original records, the auditors, and their own signatures. She took a slow breath. For the first time, she did not feel like the only person standing between the truth and the people who wanted to bury it. Adrian gathered the documents and placed them into a secure folder. Get some rest tonight. Emily gave him a tired smile. You keep saying that. Because you keep forgetting. She almost laughed. The moment was small, but it softened the tension that had filled the room. Then Adrian looked toward the closed library doors. Tomorrow, the council will hear the truth. Neither of them knew that Marcus had already prepared his own version of that truth. The council chamber was already full when Emily arrived the next morning. Pale winter light entered through the tall windows, falling across the long wooden table where the financial records had been arranged in careful stacks. Emily stood beside Adrian, trying to remain calm as the council members took their seats. Marcus Vale stood across the room with several documents in his hands, his expression composed and confident. Jonathan Reed was present as well, looking troubled but determined to explain what he knew. Adrian waited until everyone was seated before speaking. We are here to review the financial records, not to decide someone's guilt before the evidence has been examined. Marcus gave a respectful nod. Of course, Your Majesty. He then placed a report before the council. However, there is evidence that Emily Carter had access to the archive where the missing records were stored. Emily felt every eye turned toward her. Marcus continued, she also discovered the discrepancies before anyone else reported them. That raises reasonable questions about her involvement. A quiet murmur moved through the chamber. Emily remained still. She had expected this. Adrian looked at her, but he did not speak for her. Instead, he allowed her to answer. Emily stepped forward. I had access to the archive because it is my assigned responsibility. I reported the discrepancies because I found them. Marcus lifted another document. And yet several records disappeared after you began examining them. Emily looked at the page. They disappeared before I reported anything. Marcus smiled faintly. Can you prove that? Emily paused. The room seemed suddenly colder. Then she remembered the archive index. She turned toward the auditors. The archive has a daily access register. One auditor immediately searched the records. We have it. Emily pointed to the date. Look at the entry before mine. The auditor read the name aloud. Marcus Vale. The room went silent. Marcus's expression changed for only a moment. Adrian noticed. So did Emily. Marcus recovered quickly. I had legitimate administrative access. Emily nodded. I know. But the register shows you entered the archive shortly before the missing file was reported. Marcus answered, that does not prove I removed anything. Emily remained calm. No. It proves only that you were there. The financial records prove something else. Adrian looked toward the auditors. One of them placed the original ledger beside the altered report. The authorization number was reused, the auditor explained. The later document was created after the original approval. Jonathan spoke quietly. That means my authorization was copied. Marcus immediately responded, or someone with access to the archive copied it. Emily looked at him. Then why was your name on the original request? Marcus had no immediate answer. Adrian turned toward the council. We have now established 3 facts. Emily reported the discrepancy. Jonathan approved the original transfer based on information provided to him. And Marcus submitted the request that began the process. Marcus tried to explain that he had acted according to administrative instructions. Adrian asked, whose instructions? Marcus hesitated. The silence became heavier. Jonathan finally spoke. There were no instructions from me. Adrian looked at him. Are you certain? Jonathan nodded. Yes. Emily studied Marcus's face and suddenly understood something important. Marcus was not worried about the missing money anymore. He was worried about who might discover where the altered reports had been sent. Emily opened her notebook and pointed to the final account. We have not checked this destination. One auditor examined the account details and went still. The account belonged to the Blackwood Foundation for Community Relief, an organization created by Adrian's late mother. Adrian stared at the document. Marcus lowered his eyes. Emily felt the entire story shifting again. Someone had not simply hidden money. Someone had used the king's own family foundation to make the transfers appear legitimate. Adrian closed the folder slowly. Then we follow the money. He looked toward Marcus. And this time, no one gets to choose which records we see. For the first time, Marcus had nothing to say. Emily looked at Adrian and realized that the investigation had finally reached the truth hidden behind the palace walls. The council chamber remained silent after Adrian ordered the auditors to follow the money. Emily stood beside the table, watching as the documents were gathered into a single file. The Blackwood Foundation had been created by Adrian's late mother to support families across the kingdom, and the discovery that its name had been used in questionable transfers changed everything. One auditor opened a separate record and traced the destination account. The funds had not remained there. They had been moved again, through a series of smaller accounts connected to community projects that had never received the money they were promised. Emily studied the entries carefully. These transfers happened after Jonathan approved the original request, she said. But they were not part of his authorization. Jonathan looked troubled. Then someone used my approval to create additional transfers. Adrian nodded. That is what the records indicate. Marcus remained across the chamber, unusually quiet. Adrian turned toward him. You submitted the original request. Explain exactly what you were told. Marcus straightened his papers. I was informed that the community accounts required temporary adjustments because of the winter allocation schedule. Emily asked, who informed you? Marcus hesitated. The administrative office. Jonathan shook his head. That office does not issue financial instructions without my approval. Adrian looked from one man to the other. Then where did the information originate? Marcus did not answer. Emily opened another document. There is a correspondence record. She placed it on the table. The letter had been sent from Marcus's office to Jonathan 18 months earlier. It described the transfer as temporary and stated that the funds would be restored automatically. Jonathan read the letter carefully. This is what I relied on. Adrian looked at Emily. And what happened after that? Emily pointed to the later reports. The restoration never occurred. Instead, someone changed the report so the missing amount appeared to have been accounted for. One auditor compared the dates and nodded. The altered reports were submitted from the senior administration office. The room became quiet again. Marcus finally spoke. "That does not prove I altered them." Adrian answered calmly. "No. But it establishes that the changes came through an office under your authority." Marcus looked toward the council. "I had assistants handling those records." Emily watched him closely. "Then we need to know which assistant accessed them." Another auditor opened the access register. Several names appeared, but one stood out. It was an administrative clerk who reported directly to Marcus and had accessed the files on every date connected to the altered reports. Adrian asked that the clerk be brought in. When the clerk arrived, he looked nervous but cooperative. Adrian asked whether Marcus had instructed him to modify the reports. The clerk shook his head. "No, Your Majesty. I was told to replace the older versions with updated copies." Emily asked, "Who gave you those copies?" The clerk looked toward Marcus, then lowered his eyes. "They came from the senior administration office." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. The evidence was becoming impossible to dismiss. Yet Emily noticed something unusual. Marcus did not look angry. He looked afraid. She remembered the way he had watched the documents during the council hearing. He was not protecting the missing funds alone. He was protecting someone else. Emily turned to Adrian. "There is another account we have not checked." Adrian looked at her. "Which one?" "The original charitable account connected to the foundation. If the money moved through several accounts, there should be a final destination." The auditors searched the records again. After several minutes, one of them found a transaction that had been hidden under a general community expense category. The destination was not Marcus's personal account. It belonged to a private consulting firm that had provided services to the royal administration. Jonathan recognized the name. That company advised the council during the winter reforms. Adrian looked at Marcus. "Who hired them?" Marcus remained silent. Emily felt the answer before anyone spoke. The investigation had reached beyond one official, beyond one office, and possibly beyond one person. Adrian gathered the documents. "We are not stopping here." Emily nodded. The king had every reason to be angry, but he chose patience instead. He wanted the truth, not a convenient suspect. As the council members left, Adrian turned to Emily. "You saw what the rest of us missed." She shook her head. "I only looked closely." Adrian gave her a quiet smile. Sometimes that is exactly what leadership requires. Emily looked at the growing stack of evidence. She had entered the palace archives as someone almost nobody noticed. Now the king was trusting her judgment in front of his entire council. But neither of them knew that the final piece of evidence was already waiting in a place Emily had visited many times before. The next morning, Emily returned to the Eastern Archives before sunrise, determined to find the final piece of evidence. The palace was still quiet, and only the soft sound of her footsteps followed her through the marble corridor. She remembered Adrian's words from the previous evening. The evidence was waiting somewhere they had overlooked. Emily entered the archive room and went directly to the old household records. She searched the shelves, containing community allocations, winter reports, and foundation documents. After several minutes, she noticed a narrow ledger tucked behind a larger volume. It was an older archive index that listed every document transferred between the royal administration and the Blackwood Foundation. Emily opened it carefully. Several entries had been marked with small handwritten symbols. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Marcus had signed some of the administrative transfer notes, but another set of markings belonged to Jonathan Reed. Emily followed the references until she found a document number that had never appeared in the newer reports. She pulled the corresponding file from a lower shelf. Inside was the original consulting agreement for the private company mentioned during the council hearing. Emily read the first page, then the second. Her expression changed. The company had been hired to provide financial restructuring services, but the agreement had been approved only after the suspicious transfers began. More importantly, the document contained a list of accounts that were supposed to receive temporary funding. Emily compared those names with the accounts in the altered reports. They matched. She immediately carried the file to Adrian. He was already in the private library with the auditors. Emily placed the agreement on the table. I found the missing document. Adrian opened it and read carefully. One auditor followed the transaction trail. This changes the timeline. Emily nodded. The consulting company was not hired before the original transfer. It was hired afterward. Adrian looked at the dates. Then the company could not have been the reason for the first transfer. Exactly, Emily said. It was created to explain what happened afterward. Jonathan stepped closer. Then Marcus needed the original transfer to look legitimate before he created the later explanation. Adrian looked toward Marcus, who had been called to the library to answer further questions. Marcus stood quietly near the doorway. Adrian placed the document in front of him. Did you know about this agreement? Marcus looked at it for several seconds. Yes. When was it created? Marcus hesitated. After the first transfer. Emily watched him carefully. Who instructed you to arrange it? Marcus finally looked at Adrian. His voice was quieter than before. I received instructions through a private channel. Adrian's expression remained controlled. From whom? Marcus did not answer. Jonathan stepped forward. Marcus, the time for silence is over. Marcus lowered his eyes. I was told the funds were being redirected temporarily to protect the community programs during an expected budget shortage. Emily asked, who told you? Marcus looked toward the floor. A senior advisor outside the council. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Name. Marcus finally spoke. Eleanor Blackwood. The room went completely still. Eleanor was Adrian's aunt and one of the trustees of the Blackwood Foundation. Emily looked at Adrian, but he did not immediately react. Instead, he asked the auditors to verify every claim before drawing a conclusion. The auditors reviewed the correspondence and found that Eleanor had indeed received copies of several financial reports, but there was no evidence that she had personally ordered any transfer. Then Emily noticed something else. The private channel Marcus mentioned had been used to send instructions, but the messages had been routed through an administrative account. Jonathan recognized the account number. That belongs to the council office. Adrian looked at him. Can we identify who accessed it? The auditor checked the access records. The name that appeared was not Eleanor's. It was Marcus's. Emily felt the final pieces falling into place. Marcus had used Eleanor's position as a shield, making others believe that the instructions came from someone powerful enough to avoid questions. But the records showed otherwise. Adrian looked directly at Marcus. You were not following orders from my aunt. You were using her name to make people obey. Marcus said nothing. The silence was enough. Adrian turned to the auditors. Preserve every record and prepare the full report for the council. Then he looked at Emily. You were right to keep looking. Emily shook her head. We all looked. Adrian gave her a small smile. Not like you did. The investigation was finally complete. Emily's suspension was cancelled, Jonathan was cleared of intentional wrongdoing, and Marcus was removed from the investigation pending formal review. Yet Adrian did not treat the moment as a personal victory. He looked at the records and understood that the deeper problem had been trust without verification. Emily had shown him that a quiet voice could protect an entire system from a mistake. As evening approached, the council prepared to announce the findings. Emily thought the hardest part was over. She was wrong. The truth had been revealed, but the emotional weight of the past few days had not yet left her. By late afternoon, the council chamber had finally grown quiet. The investigation was over, the records had been secured, and Marcus Vale had been removed from his administrative duties pending formal review. Emily stood near the tall windows, watching snow settle across the palace gardens. For the first time in days, there was nothing left for her to prove. The council had heard the evidence. Jonathan Reed had been cleared of intentional wrongdoing. The missing funds would be restored to the affected community programs. Most importantly, Emily was no longer the person everyone had been ready to blame. Adrian entered the chamber after speaking with the auditors. He carried no documents this time. He simply looked at Emily. "It is finished." Emily nodded. "I know." Adrian stopped a few feet away. "You can leave the palace whenever you wish." Emily looked at him with surprise. "You are not asking me to stay?" "No." His answer was immediate. "You have spent enough time being told what you should do." Emily looked toward the winter garden. For years, she had believed that her place was wherever she could be useful. She had rarely asked herself what she wanted. Now the question felt different. "I think I need some time," she said. Adrian nodded. "Then take it." She smiled faintly. "You have changed." Adrian almost smiled. "Perhaps you have changed the way I see things." Emily lowered her eyes, touched by the honesty in his voice. She gathered her notebook and walked toward the great hall. She had only taken a few steps when Adrian followed at a respectful distance. He did not call her back. He simply wanted to make sure she reached the guest wing safely after everything she had endured. The palace corridors were nearly empty. Evening light stretched across the marble floor, and the chandeliers reflected softly in the polished stone. Emily walked slowly, feeling the exhaustion she had ignored for days finally catching up with her. She reached the center of the great hall and stopped. Her vision blurred for a moment. She placed one hand against a nearby table, trying to steady herself. Adrian noticed immediately. "Emily." She turned toward him, but her strength suddenly disappeared. Adrian reached her before she could fall and carefully supported her. Her eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them, she saw the concern on his face. The same question from the beginning returned, but now it carried a different weight. Adrian looked across the empty hall and then back at her. "Who hurt my Omega?" Emily tried to answer, but the words did not come. Adrian helped her sit safely in a nearby chair. He remained beside her without demanding an explanation. After a few quiet moments, Emily finally whispered, "No one hurt me." Adrian looked at her carefully. "Then why are you this exhausted?" She gave a tired smile. "Because I spent too long believing I had to handle everything alone." Adrian was silent. Emily continued, "I was afraid that if I spoke, nobody would believe me. I was afraid that if I asked for help, people would think I was weak." Adrian shook his head. "You were never weak." Emily looked at him. "You did not know me. I know you now." The words were simple, but they stayed between them. Adrian did not tell her where she belonged. He did not ask her to remain in the palace. He simply offered his hand. Emily looked at it for a moment before placing her hand in his. It was not surrender. It was trust freely given. Outside, the final winter light disappeared beyond the palace gardens. Inside, the Omega who had once been overlooked finally understood that being heard did not require becoming powerful. And the Alpha King who had once measured people by their position finally understood that true leadership began with listening. Emily was free to leave, yet she chose to remain for one more evening. Adrian stayed beside her, not as a ruler claiming what belonged to him, but as a man grateful that she had trusted him. The palace became quiet again, but this time the silence felt peaceful. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.